People who look like me won't always look out for me. Should we still celebrate political representation of ethnic minorities? In the past decade, the word representation has become part of our everyday language. Identity politics can be complicated. Many people want media and politics to be reflective of the people they represent, and ethnic minorities want to see people who care for their own interests in power. But there are constant conversations about how meaningful representation really is. Is one Black, Asian, or minority person in a position of power enough? Vice President-elect Kamala Harris made history as the first woman of Jamaican and Tamil Indian descent to be the second in command to the leader of the free world. A huge number of people argue that having a woman of color in this position is a positive move. But, as many have pointed out, Kamala Harris's political positions cannot be pushed aside when celebrating her ethnicity. We have to ask what she will do beyond representation. Having individuals like Harris in these high places may give a false impression that incremental change will happen. Such individuals are there to merely pacify those on the ground fighting against the state, so they can be used as buffers to say, "Hey, look, we have people who look like you." And that is all people of color should aspire to make it on this condition that you continue to uphold the status quo. There have been similar conversations about representation in the context of British politics, with the presence of Priti Patel, Rishi Sunak, and Alok Sharma enabling the government to boast that the cabinet is more diverse than it has been in history. But much like Kamala Harris, their policies can't go without criticism whilst applauding diversity. The Conservative Party have been called out for harsh immigration laws, lack of support for free school meals for children, and other austerity measures during their leadership. It's not enough to just be an ethnic minority. A person's actions matter. Munira Mirza was appointed to lead the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, despite having said people play up the problems of racism in the UK and that she isn't a believer of institutional racism, saying it's a myth. Earlier in the year, Trevor Phillips was trusted to lead an inquiry into COVID-19 disproportionate impact on Black and ethnic minority communities, despite being suspended from the Labour Party for Islamophobia. Certain political figures are only able to climb these ranks because they espouse the beliefs of those at the top. They are model minorities who don't bemoan the system and can ostensibly make their own luck, without whining about race. We saw this when Sajid Javid denied the existence of Islamophobia, citing his own appointment as proof, and again when Priti Patel used her own ethnicity to bolster her arguments. In these cases, your race doesn't matter, as you are upholding the status quo as the exceptional minorities that have made it. She adds that similarly, Harris's cultural background is of less importance than what she does in her role. I would not argue that Harris's appointment is a win for representation, she says. If we approach representation from a very essentialist position of viewing someone who is not white who has made it, then yes, in that sense it is a win. However, what does this actually entail? Having someone like Harris as second in command, to me, is more about what she will do with her position. Will she deliver justice and change the material realities of those who are marginalized? Assuming someone is on your side simply because they look like you is superficial. I would argue that, in essence, this is exactly what is wrong when people start indulging in representational politics, in assuming that people who look like me will, therefore, look out for me. This is flawed because you can't assume someone's political allegiances or alliances solely based on skin color, tone, hair, or whatever other variable people use to ascertain this representation. She thinks we need to rethink how we framed the conversation on representation. If we are talking about wealth inequality, then we need a different kind of representation altogether, she says, class representation. The only way we can achieve a form of political representation is through the collective struggle on an anti-racist platform where we build solidarity along class lines rather than bland cultural ties. Only through this will we be able to focus on ensuring everyone has access to material goods to better their lives instead of focusing on the banal politics of representation. It's not to say that representation is a meaningless endeavor. Black, Asian and other minorities have rejoiced at the satisfaction of seeing themselves reflected, whether it's in the cinematic experience, in seeing underrepresented figures dominate industries they're often excluded from, in books, toys, or the success of Black-owned businesses. Research also shows that companies that do a better job of representing minorities are more likely to be successful. Representation can make marginalized people feel like they matter, even if it's as simple as a plaster in a different skin tone. But we can miss the goal of achieving true racial parity if we get too excited over isolated examples of representation without inviting critique and calls for further progression. Instead of being honest about the destructive record of Harris' legal career, much social commentary has revolved around cringe-inducing references to Kamala or bizarre displays of cultural authenticity. Through mechanisms like these, multicultural celebration displaces radical critique and real political analysis. We need to remember that even the most diverse faces can be problematic. Put simply, racial representation alone isn't enough, and we cannot allow the momentary joy of representation to stop us asking for change. At the moment, citizens seem to care more about how representatives make us feel as opposed to what their preferences are. There is a worry that citizens will not put pressure on Biden, Harris to be more progressive. It looks like politics is constantly trying to solve problems and introducing new ones in the process. True representation occurs when more people have a sense of being a part of government and feel like they have the efficacy to make things better. That was part of the joy from the last election, that our representation could be made better. True representation is a process, not an end point.